Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. My name is Matt Barton. I'm the Urban Conservation Specialist with St. Louis Audubon Society, and tonight is our Fall 2026 BirdSafe St. Louis training and informational session. I'm sure that if any of you have been out doing some birding recently, you'll have started to notice that, migration is underway. There's a lot of shorebirds already on the move. So, migration is a really exciting time in the lives of birds, but it's also a time that can be a little perilous for them as well, which we'll talk about this evening. But with that, let's go ahead and just jump right in. Tonight's presentation should be around an hour long. We'll talk about birds and migration, a bit more specifically about our project and logging observations within it, and then we'll round it out with some questions and answers. So I like to start a lot of my presentations with this picture of City Garden in downtown St. Louis. For those of you who aren't familiar with this area, it's right downtown along Market Street, just a little bit west of Keener Plaza, so right downtown in the thick of things. And when you see this space, you can see why it might be attractive for birds. And you can see there's a lot of development around this park, but we've got some trees and other native plants over there, so there's good food resources and shelter for the birds. There's also water features within the park, so it's really everything that a bird would need to be happy. But when you start to look at the picture a little more closely, you might start to notice some kind of peculiarities, like these little orbs in the sky here, or even this backwards sign. And the reason is that this isn't a picture of City Garden, it's a picture of a reflection of City Garden in one of the surrounding buildings. And I think this goes to demonstrate pretty well, some of the challenges that birds are trying to navigate as they're going through our urban spaces. We're intelligent human beings, and we have the luxury of sitting here and trying to digest this image and make sense of it. But birds don't have that luxury. They're flying around, leading their lives, and they're not thinking about, am I going to run into glass? Because they don't know what glass is. And every year, millions, or pardon me, billions of birds migrate through the United States and Canada during their annual spring and fall migration. And that migration is something that can put them at risk. Um, 70% of our North American bird species are migratory, and 80% of those migratory birds actually migrate at night. And you might think, why would a bird, migrate at nighttime? It seems kind of counterintuitive. But there's actually multiple reasons why birds migrate at night. One is that there's cooler temperatures, so it's just less stress on the birds. Some of these birds that are going on, some very long distance migrations, it's just a little easier on them. There's also fewer predators, like those diurnal predators like hawks and things. So it's a little bit safer as well. But really importantly, it's been shown that birds use celestial cues, such as the star's orientation in the sky, and also things like the sun setting on the horizon in order to help orient themselves along their migratory journeys. And this is a short video put together by Cornell Lab of Ornithology using eBird data and other data collected over the years, and it's illustrating spring migration. So you can see these little dots starting to kind of go across the map. They're representing different species of birds as they move from the southern hemisphere in Central and South America up into North America, coming into the United States, and some birds even going further into the boreal forests of Canada. But I like this illustration because it shows, it's not just one big push, the birds kind of come in waves, and there's some variability from year to year, depending on things like weather patterns, resource availability, and more. So It's really a quite an amazing thing that, we're still learning more and more about. Here in the United States, we have the four major migratory pathways, the Pacific, the Central, the Mississippi, and the Atlantic. Here in St. Louis, we are right in the middle of the Mississippi Flyway, as denoted by the red star, just to the south of the important confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. And the Mississippi Flyway is a particularly important area. It's used by 60% of our North American songbird species, 40% of our North American waterfowl species, and that's representing over 325 species of birds. So it's really an important flyway. Um, in the spring, birds are generally moving, like we mentioned, from south to north, and they're going from their wintering grounds up to their breeding grounds. In the fall, it's the opposite. Birds are generally going from the northern breeding grounds back down to their wintering grounds in the south. In the fall, migration is generally a little more spread out. So, some birds are starting to migrate in late July, and some are still migrating into late fall. So, as far as some of our important campaigns like Lights Out in the St. Louis area in the fall, we kind of split the difference there and we observe our Lights Out period in September. Unfortunately, it's been found that St. Louis is a pretty dangerous place for migrating birds. So in 2019, Cornell Lab did a study where they looked at light pollution levels, the natural geography, and used radar data to study bird migratory paths. And you can see the results here on the right represented, where the kind of yellow, more brighter colors are representing higher areas of migratory activity, and those white circles are indicating the radar stations that were used. And when they looked at all this data and did their analysis, they determined that St. Louis is the fifth most dangerous city for migrating birds in the spring and the sixth most dangerous in the fall. Largely, unfortunately, bird populations are in crisis as well. In the United States and Canada, we've lost 30% of our bird population since 1970. And you can see a representation of that here on this chart on the left, just showing these kind of broader classes of birds. And unfortunately, by and large, most are in decline. And so, why is that? Why are we seeing these huge, decreases in population? And there's multiple factors for this. One is things like habitat loss. So, as, urban expansion happens and, trees are cut down and areas are developed for subdivision, that's less habitat for birds, to go about their natural life cycles. There's also things like changing climate conditions. So if you think about things like rising sea levels, that's going to affect, things like habitat loss. So as the sea level rises because of the climate changes, we're losing, beach. So that affects shorebirds. There's also cat predation, which is the leading cause of human-linked bird mortality. So, I have to give my mandatory plug that if you have a cat and it needs to go outside, make sure that you're, containing it in some way for the safety of your cat as well as, the other animals in nature. And then importantly, is also collisions, which we'll talk about in more depth here tonight. A lot of people don't realize the sheer scale of the problem with bird collisions and its effect on their populations. So it's estimated that a billion birds are killed annually in the United States alone from building collisions. And you can see a breakdown of that below. So around 56% are happening at low-rise buildings classed as 4 to 11 stories, 44% at residences of 1 to 3 stories, and then less than 1% at high-rise buildings that are classed as 12 stories or more, but those buildings do have the highest birds per building mortality rates, which makes sense. There's a lot of these like really large buildings, they can kill a lot of birds, but proportionately to all of the buildings in the country, they aren't that much. Um, what is it that causes these collisions and really drives them? The two primary risk factors are light and glass. Like we mentioned a little bit earlier, a majority of our migratory birds are migrating at night, and they're using these celestial cues like the stars to help to orient and navigate along their way. When birds are passing through our urban areas where there's all this light pollution and that associated sky glow, the birds can become disoriented and confused and start to, waste their energy as they're drawn into these dangerous urban areas where there's the higher likelihood that they might have a collision with a building. Uh, the effect of the light pollution can be especially dangerous when there's unsettled weather in the area because the birds might be coming down lower in the sky anyway to avoid some of those upper level disturbances. And then they're closer to those sources of light that would potentially draw them in. A kind of famous example of birds and the light that effect that light has on them is the Tribute Lights Memorial in New York City. So every year on September 11th, two beacons of light are shown into the sky from dusk to dawn in commemoration of September 11th. Unfortunately, as that date falls on the calendar, that's during the middle of, fall migration, as naturally there's a lot of birds that are passing down the eastern seaboard. So in this picture here, you can see the two beacons of light and what, appears to be, insects like we might see, with a street lamp. But those are actually birds that are trapped in those columns of light. And once they're there, they'll just kind of continue to circle and waste their energy and become disoriented. So when it was realized what was happening and the effect on the birds, volunteers with the New York City Bird Alliance uh, started to get together to form teams. So what they do on the night of September 11th is they have people sitting out watching the columns. Whenever 1,000 birds are observed to be in the columns of light, or a bird is observed to be, falling out of the sky in exhaustion, the lights are turned off for 20 minutes, which allows those birds to clear that area, continue on their migratory route, and then the lights are turned back on. So, I think I like that story because it goes to show that, there can be compromise. And when we, realize that there's a problem, we can work together, to find a good solution where, we're helping the birds not to have, their migration interrupted and potentially, potentially have mortal effects on them, but also being able to honor the September 11th attack. And when it comes to the other piece of the equation, when it comes to collisions, there's glass. So, like I mentioned earlier, birds don't see glass as a barrier because birds don't know what glass is. So, when it comes to glass, there's a couple of issues. There's really reflective glass, like we have in that top image, where that bank of windows is reflecting all of those trees and foliage that are to the right and behind the photographer. And a bird might see, birds see things in a very literal way. So they might see that bank of windows and think, oh, that's actually a tree over there. Maybe there's some food, or maybe there's somewhere I can, take shelter over there. Instead, they'll fly over, they have a collision, and they're either injured or killed. There's also that issue of transparency in glass, where a bird simply doesn't realize there's anything there. Again, they try to fly through that area and they have a collision. In a lot of our downtown spaces, we also have these glass canyons or walkways. And, those are really nice pieces of infrastructure for people, especially, on days where the weather isn't great or, it's cold. But it's just another kind of architectural feature that birds have to try to make sense of and, navigate around as they're, living in our urban spaces. So here's a picture, a couple pictures that I took in downtown Clayton, just kind of showing this issue of reflectivity in glass. And you can, see really quickly where this could be confusing for a bird. The buildings are reflecting the sky all around them, so like giving this kind of infinity effect of this on the sky. But then, the buildings are reflecting off of one another as well. So again, we have the luxury of knowing what glass is and being able to process this a little more than a bird does. And it's not hard to see how this could be very confusing for a bird. And additionally, we also have this little glass canyon here as well to boot. But with these urban hazards to birds in mind, that is what saw the creation of the BirdSafe St. Louis program, with the goal of establishing long-term community relationships that support bird safe practices and reduce bird fatalities in the St. Louis region. And so what we're doing with our monitoring in the areas, we're collecting data on the where, when, and who is colliding with buildings so that we can work with different property managers and stakeholders in the St. Louis area to try to provide solutions and reduce that mortality. In St. Louis, downtown St. Louis, we began monitoring in the fall of 2020. From the fall of 2020 to this past spring, noting that we did not survey in fall of 2022, we've recorded almost 2,000 observations along our route, accounting for 100 species of birds. And you can see here a breakdown of those species that we've seen most often historically. In downtown Clayton, we began monitoring in the spring of 2024. Through spring of 2026, we've recorded 341 observations, accounting for 50 species of birds. So just kind of a big overview picture of like our efforts from 2025. We conducted 130 surveys between the two sites and recorded 547 collisions. And you can see a breakdown of that here in the chart on the right. So we're seeing roughly 76, or in 2025, we saw roughly 76% of our recorded collisions in downtown St. Louis. And as we're, continuing to do our monitoring, we're starting to see some patterns, and one of them at both sites is that our most problematic buildings are located near these green spaces. So in downtown Clayton last year, we recorded the most collisions at 1 North Brentwood. This is a building that's just to the north of Shaw Park. And in downtown St. Louis, we recorded the most collisions at Bank of America Plaza, which is just to the south of City Garden and is that very reflective building from my first slide. There's a lot more information about, what we encountered and what we documented in 2025, a lot more than I can get into this evening. But if you're interested in learning more and seeing what we've found, you can locate our 2025 report on our website, or you can also locate that by scanning the QR code here. So, an important question is, once we're out there collecting that data, but, what are we doing with it? What can we do with it? And there's a lot of different things that we can do with this data. One is that we submit that to a data aggregator called Global Bird Collision Mapper. That is an online aggregator that collects data from other collision monitoring programs like ours from around the world and puts it in, one place so that you can get a larger and better understanding of, how this is affecting birds globally, this issue of collisions. Our data from St. Louis has actually been used in some larger national studies as well, including a study between National Audubon Society and KPMG Analytics. Our data is also stored in our iNaturalist projects online, where it's available to researchers or other practitioners and conservationists. And importantly, it allows us to start conversations locally with different, stakeholders and property managers about, what we're seeing and what we can do. So an example of that is this past spring, we did worked on a project with the Missouri History Museum where collision deterrent markers were installed on the two large walls of windows that lead out to the courtyards. Historically, staff at the museum had noticed that they were having problems with collisions during migration and were trying to find solutions on, what was causing that and what could be done. Thanks to some collaboration between the Department of Conservation, St. Louis Audubon, and the History Museum, those windows were treated, and some really great educational signage, which you can see in the center photo here, um, was designed as well, so that as people are going through the museum, those deterrent markers have that practical benefit of deterring collisions, but also then educating all of the people who pass through the museum. We also use our data to try to work on that light part of the equation by advocating for buildings and different organizations to join our regional lights out efforts. In St. Louis, that will be coming up really quickly here in September when the Gateway Arch, the St. Louis Zoo, Washington University, and more will be going dark to help our birds migrate through the area safely. We're really trying to use that data to tell the story of, what's happening in St. Louis and then showing that it, doesn't necessarily have to be that way and that we can do some really common sense things to help reduce bird mortality. But with all of that in mind, let's go ahead and move into our talking a bit more specifically about our projects and recording data within them and what our game plan will be for this fall. So this fall, we will continue to do our monitoring at the two sites in downtown Clayton and downtown St. Louis. Um, Downtown Clayton, we originally decided to go there because there was, more buildings being built and properties being redeveloped. We're also starting to, get some really good receptiveness from City Hall in Clayton, which is exciting. I'm hoping to have some projects to report there coming up shortly, but I won't get ahead of myself. As far as in downtown St. Louis, that's an area, that we've been historically monitoring, and we know that there's a lot of, issues down there. So by continuing to build our data set down there, we can, continue to build that case that, we need to start making some changes and thinking into the future about how we can design our buildings in a more effective way to prevent collisions. So on the map here, this is our map for our site in downtown Clayton. And basically what the map is showing is it's showing the buildings that we want to survey around, which are indicated in blue. And then those dark blue borders around the buildings are indicating what sides of the buildings are accessible for us to survey. So when you're out surveying, essentially what we want to do is walk around those blue target buildings on the sides that they're accessible, and we're looking for dead or injured birds. Um, the map, again, this is kind of just a zoomed in version showing kind of those bold outlines around the building, showing what sides of the building are accessible. So the Pierre Laclede building, we can monitor all sides of that building, but next door at Central Bank, because of some of the design of the building, we're not able to monitor that east side. So you just follow the map and it gives you that guidance on, where you're able to access. So when a bird is found, the first thing that we want to do is we want to take pictures of it from multiple angles. And the reason that we want to take pictures from multiple angles is to aid in identification. So we want to be able we want to be sure that we're able to see all of those different patterns and markings in the bird's plumage because sometimes, like in certain species of birds, um, a very small, difference in plumage could be the difference between one species and another. So those photos help us to identify the bird, and it's our one chance of seeing the bird. So the photos that we co try to collect for each bird are a top-down view or dorsal view, a bottom view or ventral, a view from the side, a clear view of the head, and then a context shot, which we'll get into that a little more on the next slide. And once you have those photos, we'll submit those into our iNaturalist projects on our phones. So the context shot is basically kind of a wider shot that is showing where the bird is within the context of the building. So when we're taking these context shots, we place a small cone in the photograph, which you can see here or right there in this photo or right here in the last. And what that cone is doing is it's helping us to, when we look at this photo, very quickly be able to tell where the bird is in that photo. Some of the birds that we find are very small, warblers, they can like fit in the palm of your hand. So when you're taking a larger shot, sometimes some of these very small birds can very quickly get lost within the shot. We do provide cones for our volunteers, so that's something that we'll establish. We collect some information, and that'll be one of the things we ask is about your equipment needs. If you have something else that you would like to use, that's fine as well. You just want to make sure that it's something that really, stands out. So that's why the cones are kind of nice because they're usually these kind of neon colors that really pop. And here's just an example of those shots that we were talking about that we want to take for the birds. So from left to right here, we've got the dorsals, that top-down shot. We have the side view. We have a head shot, so try, a bit better view of the head, the ventral or the bottom, like the tummy view. And then we've also got the context shot, just showing that kind of wider landscape that the bird was found within. So once we have those photos, like I mentioned, we log everything in our iNaturalist projects. And for those of you who aren't familiar, iNaturalist is, as they describe it, a crowdsourced species identification system and an organism occurrence recording tool. It's kind of a mouthful, right? But iNaturalist is really an amazing tool, and it offers a lot of great resources, such as being able to record observations. It can also help with getting identification on things. So, if someone finds a bird and they're not sure what it is, we can, within the project in St. Louis, help to identify it, or people in the iNaturalist community can help as well. And then iNaturalist is great for collaborating with others to collect information for a common purpose, like our collision monitoring efforts. It's a really useful program as well because that information is easily accessible to anybody, with a computer access or internet access. The information can be exported from the projects in iNaturalist so that we can do analysis and, start to look at that data and draw some conclusions. And then it also just is green, it uses less supplies. In the past, when we did collision monitoring, each bird actually got a physical ticket that the surveyors would write out. So this, cuts out the need for all of that paper waste, and it also, makes things a lot easier as far as getting all the information gathered in one place. So what you'll need in order to participate is you'll need to download the iNaturalist app to your phone. It is a free app, but you do need a smartphone to download it. So in the event that you don't have a smartphone, that's totally fine. You're still able to participate with our monitoring. The thing is that you'll just need to make sure that you're working with somebody who has a smartphone. That way, someone out there is able to record the observations. If you're using iOS or you have an iPhone, when you go to your app store, you'll want to choose iNaturalist Classic. There is a newer kind of version of iNaturalist, but it doesn't currently have the functionality to add observations into our project. So on iOS, you want to be sure you're using iNaturalist Classic. On Android, there's only one option so far. Still, it's just iNaturalist, and you can see the thumbnail for that from the App Store in the image there below. Um, and then once you have an account, you download the app, you'll create an account if you don't have one already, and we'll get that iNaturalist username from you so that we can add you to our projects and that you're able to record observations. All right, so let's go through an example now, just kind of step by step of recording an observation. So whenever you're whether you're in downtown St. Louis or Clayton, the survey protocols are nearly identical. Um, so the first steps are pretty much going to be the same regardless of where you're at. So what you start by doing is taking those photos, and then once you're in the iNaturalist app, you would click the Add Observation button. On the Android app, that looks like a little green circle with a plus symbol. Once you do that, it'll take you to your camera roll and allow for you to select the pictures that you want to use for the observation. And you can see that denoted here by the little blue check marks, showing that in this case, we're going to be adding these 5 photos to the observation. Once you have selected the photos that you'd like to use, you click that Add button, and it takes you to the observation screen. And you can see that those 5 photos that we selected on the last screen are now showing as added to the observation. So from there, just kind of working our way down the screen here, there's this screen or field that says, "What did I see?" So this is where you would add in a species. So if you, in this instance, if you found this bird in the example and you wanted to identify it, in this case, it would be an American redstart. So you could click there and put American redstart. In the event that you found the bird, but you're just not sure what it is, you know, when in doubt, you can always just put birds, and that'll kind of get the identification started in the right direction to say that, okay, we're at least looking at a bird versus, like a tree or something like that. So once you've selected, the species or birds, the next field down here is notes. That's just a field where if there's anything that you need to tell me or about the observation, or there's anything, noteworthy that you want to include, you can add a note so that the project coordinators like myself can see that and see what you're referencing. This is also a good place to put notes for incidental finds, which we'll talk about in a few slides coming up. And then from there, the next field down, we have our date and time field. That should automatically populate for you. Next is the GPS location. That should also automatically populate as long as you've got the location settings allowed on your phone for the app. Um, if you want to see where your pin has been dropped, if you click that area, it'll pull up a Google Maps and show exactly where it's saying that you are as well. And if you need to adjust it to be a little more accurate, you can just drag and drop the cursor or the pin there. Location visibility, that will be open. That's the default option, and we want that to be open so that our data is visible to others on places like iNaturalist, Global Bird Collision Mapper, etc. Um, Captivated or captive or cultivated, you don't really need to worry about that field. And then finally, we get down to the Add to Projects field. So once you click that, it pulls up a new screen that shows all of the different projects that you might be involved with on iNaturalist. So here for our example in downtown Clayton, we would select the option here that says downtown Clayton. And once you've selected that project, it pulls up a series of questions for that specific site. So this is a kind of a good way that we can see once we are in that project to make sure that we're in the correct one. Because if, for example, you were in Clayton, but you accidentally clicked the downtown St. Louis project, when you start going to the building name field, none of the buildings in Clayton would be listed. So that's kind of a way you can proof yourself and say, oh, if the building it should be there, you might have accidentally clicked the wrong project. But if that's the case, no problem. You just deselect downtown and you select Clayton. From there, those project questions will populate. And each of the questions has a short description underneath it as well that kind of will help to guide you if you're out there in the field and you're not entirely sure what's being asked. It'll kind of, give you some tips or tricks about, what's being requested specifically. So the first thing that is asked is the building name. And so what you'll use is you'll use that site map to find that building name that you're outside of, and then you'll select it from this drop-down box here. The options are listed in roughly east to west orientation. So when you're looking at your map, you can kind of use that to help guide you on where the building would be in the drop-down. In the event that you find a bird that's either between buildings that we're monitoring specifically, or it's maybe outside of a building that's not one of those target buildings in blue, we still want to record that, but you would mark the building as other. From there, the next question is select the side of the building. So that's pretty straightforward. You just pick, the side of the building that you're on. If you're not great with, what direction, your directions on what side of the building you're on, Google Maps or, your map app on your phone can help with that. The next field is incidental find. So that's going to be a yes or no question. And you would want to choose yes in those instances where we're finding the bird between buildings or around a building that's not one of our targets. And then that's where you would, if you have that incidental find, you can put more details in that notes section to say things like something like the name of the building that you found it outside of or the address, just something to kind of help us narrow down, okay, we know it wasn't at a target building, but where was it? The next field is the distance from the strike point. That is, it's not an exact science. You're not taking out like a tape measure with you or anything like that. Generally, what we're doing is we're just kind of walking off the distance from where it appears that the bird collided with the building. And when we're making that determination, we want to look around as well to see, did the bird hit the main body of the building or did it perhaps, hit an overhang above us? If the bird hit an overhang, we would want to count the distance between the bird and that overhang versus the bird and the side of the building. So, just kind of using those context clues to try to determine the best you can where that bird hit. When we record those observations, if you can avoid using an apostrophe or quotation marks to denote feet or inches, that's really helpful as well. It just kind of helps with exporting the data and keeping things clean. But if you accidentally use the feet or inches with apostrophe or quotation marks, it's not a big deal. I can always get that on the back end and fix that. The next field down here is possible predation. So when we're out recording these observations, if we find a bird and it's clearly been preyed upon, like it appears to be a predatory event, so things like the bird's missing its head, or it's been, partially consumed, or you might just find just a wing. Those are all, good indicators that this was probably, a predatory event. In the event that, you find something that's clearly predatory, we don't need to log that in the project since we don't want to overstate, we don't want to possibly mark a predatory event as a collision. So we don't want to overstate our numbers. In those predatory cases, you can just take the carcass and dispose of it. But in the event that, you're looking and you just aren't sure and you're one way or the other, is this predatory, is it not? If you're in doubt, go ahead and log it in the project like you would any other project or observation, but then choose yes under possible predation. And what that'll do is it'll signal to myself and the other project managers to take, just a closer look at that particular observation and make a determination on is this, predatory event or was it really a collision? So once you've answered all of those questions, you would want to go ahead and confirm those by clicking the little check mark here up in the upper right-hand corner. Uh, in the event that you have, maybe accidentally forgot to include or answer any of those fields, the project will prevent you from going to the next screen. So that's kind of a good way to, prove to make sure, okay, like I've got everything filled out that I need to. Otherwise, the project won't let you continue. But once you select that check mark, it'll take us back to that original observation page where now you can see we've got the pictures of the bird, all of those other kind of initial fields we talked about. And now under projects, we have a one in right here indicating that that's being added to a project. And to complete that observation, you would just click the green check mark here, and you've successfully logged an observation in the project. And I know that, going over that on the screen, it can feel like it's a lot and that there's a lot of information there. Um, but I think that, most people who have gone through the protocol before would tell you that, once you've logged a couple of observations, it's really intuitive going through, the screens and um, you'll find very quickly, I have a feeling that, it's pretty easy to log the observations in downtown St. Louis.
Matt, can I ask a question?
Of course,
So, if you know it's a thrush, but you don't know which one, do you still just put bird?
it's a good question. So, if you know like the like family of birds, like so, yeah, in the event that you found a bird, it's some kind of thrush, but you're not sure like is it a wood thrush or a Swainson's thrush? In that case, if you know that it's a thrush, you can go down to like lower levels of identification. So, for that example, I believe there is like a grouping called like thrushes and I can't remember the exact name, but if you know more specifically that, like, okay, it's a thrush, you can go ahead and classify that identification down to that level, and then we'll just go like from there and continue building out the ID. So then we can say, okay, we know it's a thrush. Let's get down to that species level. That's a great question. So here is our kind of large site map for downtown St. Louis. So the buildings that we're monitoring around in downtown St. Louis are, right down in the thick of things. So City Garden here, we've got Keener Plaza right here, and then a bit further to the east is the Arch Grounds. Again, the buildings that we're monitoring around have these dark blue outlines showing where you can access. But in downtown St. Louis, it's basically the exact same as the Clayton project in terms of the questions that you're answering, but there are two additional fields, which I'll describe here. One is carcass information. That is going to always be the default answer of no. In the past, we collected some carcasses for educational purposes and for taxidermy. At this time, we aren't doing any program like that. So in this case, you'll always just leave that as no. And the other field that's unique for downtown St. Louis is the section of the building. And that uses a secondary map that some of our buildings in downtown St. Louis use to really help us to hone in on where a collision occurred at some of these larger buildings that have a lot of collisions historically. The idea there being that we can really dial in and say that, in a situation where the property manager wants to do some renovations and improvements on the property, but can't do an entire, renovation or, deterrent markers on an entire building, we can help to guide and say, this is where would, be the best spot to start, doing that kind of work. But here is an example of one of those section maps in downtown St. Louis. So this is the Spire building, and it's really straightforward. So if you found a bird outside of Spire, you would answer all of those normal questions. And when it came time for that question about the section of the building, let's just say that the bird was located here, you would just in that field type Spire UW4. So again, this Spire building, it takes up an entire city block downtown. So, it's one thing for us to say, okay, we found a bird outside of the Spire building. You know, that's good to know, but it's a massive building. So when we use these section maps on these large buildings, it allows for us to really quickly say, okay, not only was there a collision at the Spire building, but this is exactly the area that it occurred in. And allows, for myself and, anybody else that's looking at the data from our projects with the maps to really, in a more meaningful way, say, this is where this particular collision was observed. So just kind of going over some frequently asked questions that typically, come up around the project. One question a lot that we get a lot is how long does a survey take? And the answer to that is it varies. Um, I would say on average, it's probably around an hour and a half, but that can be a bit variable depending on things like how fast you walk or how many collisions there are that morning. Naturally, when there aren't as many collisions, you finish the route a bit more quickly because you have less to record. So another question that often comes up is what do we do with the bird carcasses that we find? We currently don't have any sort of partnership where that serves as, like a repository where they're able to store those specimens. So our current protocol is that we dispose of them in a trash can in the area. Luckily, there are a lot of trash cans in the downtown St. Louis and downtown Clayton area, so you're not really usually in a position where you're having to carry around a bird carcass. But we dispose of them for a couple of reasons. One is that it prevents that bird then from being counted again accidentally in a subsequent survey. Again, we're not trying to double count the collisions and overstate, what's happening. So that disposing of the carcass helps to prevent that double count. And then it's just generally more sanitary. The carcasses can draw in scavengers and other, animals that we don't necessarily want in our downtown spaces. So this just helps to kind of deter that as well. In terms of wearing gloves, that's a personal choice. Um, if you don't wear gloves, I would recommend, using just really following smart sanitary, protocol. So, if you're not using gloves, using sanitizer after you've handled a bird, and then doing things like, avoiding touching, your face or your eyes or your mouth until you've had a chance to, go inside, really wash your hands and clean up. So, just following smart sanitary protocol. If you would like to wear gloves, an option is if you want to use your own, you can use a pair that can be sanitized and reused. We, as a program, also offer some disposable glove to surveyors, which, if you're interested in some of those, we'll collect that in your equipment request. Um, for those of you that might be watching this who are some of our more legacy monitors that were, doing monitoring back in the paper forms days, again, we no longer use those. Everything is now stored digitally in our iNaturalist projects online, so no paper forms again this season. And when it comes to the maps, what I would usually suggest is I email out the maps, those site maps, and then those section maps for the buildings downtown. Those attachments can be downloaded from the email directly onto your phone, which that's, a pretty good idea just in case you find yourself downtown and for, whatever reason the internet's not working. That way they're just downloaded on your phone. They're nice and accessible. Um, if in doubt, you can always also print out a physical copy. It never hurts. And then, you've got a quick reference there as well if you prefer that physical medium. So while we're out monitoring, there is the chance that, you will encounter a bird that's stunned and still alive. If that happens, typically what we'll do is if the bird is in a position where, it's in a kind of imminent danger, like maybe laying in the middle of the sidewalk. What I'll typically try to do is move them to like a safer location, like maybe some nearby landscaping, just so that they're a little more covered and are at, less risk from the obvious things like, accidentally maybe getting stepped on. Um, Typically, if I do something like that, I'll go back at the end of the survey just to see, were they able to move on to another location, or are they there and maybe need to be taken to a rehabber? If you find a bird that's visibly injured and has an obvious injury and they need help, what I would suggest is reaching out to the respective local rehabber for guidance. So, in our project, the majority of birds that we encounter are songbirds, which they would go to wild bird rehabilitation up in Overland for help. If you find an injured raptor, so something like a hawk, an owl, an eagle, those would go to World Bird Sanctuary out in Valley Park. For injured waterfowl, so something like a duck or perhaps a heron or an egret, those would go out to Wildlife Rescue Center in Baldwin. In all of those scenarios, what you should do is you should call out to the rehab center and advise them on, what's going on. They might have you send in some pictures so that they can, kind of help to assess the situation, but they'll give you guidance on what should be done next, whether that's, trying to maybe, take the bird, to the rehab center or, whatever the case might be. Um, in the event that you do end up taking a bird to one of the our rehab partners, if you can just let me know, I like to try to keep track of that because I like to try to, if there's a positive outcome and the bird is successfully able to be rehabbed and released, I like to try to do some storytelling around that to, talk about what birds are facing and then also to highlight some of the great work that our local rehabbers do. So, how do the surveys work? So, what I'll be doing here this coming week is I'll send out a sheet, a Google sheet, which serves as our sign up calendar. Uh, what you'll do is it'll have, a basically calendar format where you fill in your names on the date that you would like to survey. You are free to sign up for as many surveys as you would like. And all surveys will have at least two people on them, ideally. The reason for that is, it's always just smart to work in pairs for safety. And it's also just helpful as well to have someone there with you in case, you're going through the project and you have any questions, or, it's just helpful to have two sets of eyes looking versus one. We've got a very good safety track record, so not many, not really many concerns there either, but working in pairs, helps to keep things safe as well. Ideally, your first survey is going to be with somebody who's done the protocol before. That way, if you're, out there and you're logging your observations, you're not on your own. Someone is there that they can help guide you, answer any questions you might have, and then you can, learn the process a bit more from them. And everybody's got their own kind of little tips and tricks or how they like to approach things. So you can learn a lot from working with different people. When it comes time for the morning that you're signed up for, typically a day or two before the survey, what you'll want to do is reach out to the person that signed up with you, and you'll coordinate on where and when you'll meet. Typically, we're starting around dawn or sunrise, so we do like to start early. The reason for that is that we want to start surveying before building maintenance crews are out and possibly are starting to, clean up the carcasses that are around the building. That does happen. And then also then if we're out there early, there's less chance of a scavenger coming and interfering with the carcass and potentially either, moving it or just completely removing it from the area, and then we miss that observation. In the fall, we're typically looking at starting around, 6:15, 6:30. And you just remember that in the fall here, as we get later into the season, that dawn and sunrise is going to get a bit later each morning. So as we get a little further into the season, your start time will also get a little bit later. So just for reference, when we typically start around the beginning of September, so on September 1st, dawn is at 6:03, sunrise is at 6:30. A month later, on October 1st, dawn is at 6:30 and sunrise is at 6:57. So that's one of the nice things about fall is that we get to wake up a little bit later as we progress through the season. As far as parking in downtown Clayton, there's a lot of metered parking that is available that's free before 8 a.m. There's also the free parking lot right next to St. Louis County Library North Central Branch, where I personally like to park and start my when I survey in Clayton. For downtown St. Louis, it's pretty much all metered parking, but a lot of folks like to start along Market Street there. Again, those meters are free until 8 a.m. After that, you can either, feed the meter, or they also have the Park mobile app so that if you're out surveying and then 8 o'clock rolls around, you can conveniently add to the meter from your phone, which is nice. When it comes to actually making observations, both surveyors are able to post into the project, but the key is that we only want to have one observation per bird. So if if one person wants to log all the observations, or if you want to, take turns, logging, it's completely up to you and your partner. But again, we just want to make sure only one observation per bird so that we're not double counting. When it comes to stunned birds, we do want to try to maybe get a picture of those when we can as well to just include, but we don't need to go through that whole process of collecting all of those angles. We don't want to stress out a bird that's already injured and, already stressed out. So typically what I'll do in those cases is just take a picture from a distance and just have one picture. And then in the notes, I'll include something like stunned bird. Just that way, if someone in the future is looking at that observation, they can quickly see, oh, it was a stunned bird. That's why there's just one picture. Um, there is also the chance that while you're out and about, that people will come up to you and be curious about what you're doing. And a lot of times, it's people are just genuinely curious, what are you doing? In those instances, I just, be friendly and try to, explain a bit about what you're doing. I typically say something like, we're out with St. Louis Audubon Society. We're volunteers looking for and documenting collisions where birds are colliding with infrastructure. Usually that will start conversations, and you might get a story from that person about, a collision that they saw, or, the collisions that they've noticed outside of the building they work in. But yeah, just talk with people, and, it's a great way to, spread our message about, what it's these birds are facing as they're navigating, our cities. In the event that you're somewhere that you're uncomfortable, or the like security guards are asking you to leave, that doesn't happen really very often. But if you're ever in doubt or you're not comfortable, just go ahead and leave the site there and just let me know that you had an issue. Like I said, it's very, very rare that we ever have any issues, but if you do, just let me know and I can try to deal with those. Um, we do want to make sure that when we're out surveying, that we're surveying all of those target buildings. Some days you'll only find a few birds. Uh, So, and other times you'll find none, which, in an ideal world, we're not finding any, and it's just you're taking a nice morning walk. But if you do have a morning that you go out and you find no collisions, that is a data point itself. So we want to make sure to record that. So if you find no collisions on a given morning, just send me a quick email to say, hey, we went out and surveyed, no collisions found, and I'll put that in our logbook for the season. While we are out and about, uh, we might encounter some bats, and MDC is currently working on a bat project in iNaturalist where they're tracking bat sightings across the state. With their goal is, documenting species and where they're encountered to get a better understanding of the distribution of bats throughout the state. So if you're out and about and you find a bat, if you'd like to log that, that would be great. You would just take a picture or two, like you see here on the left, and you just record that as a general iNaturalist observation. There's no special project that you need to add anything to, no special questions to answer like in our projects. You would just make a general observation, and MDC staff can then get into iNaturalist and find bat tags in the state and add them to their project. Um, so if you do find a bat, my main ask is that you don't handle them. Bats can be vectors for rabies and other illnesses. So unless you have experience working with bats and you're vaccinated against rabies, um, err on the side of caution. Please do not handle the bats. If you find one that you think needs help, please contact a local rehabber that can assist with that, versus putting yourself at potential risk. As far as the bats, we do tend to see, I would say, more of them in the fall when we're having those kind of, warm after fall afternoons that might have a, big plunge in temperature overnight. On the following mornings, it's not uncommon to see, some kind of groggy bats maybe hanging down low on a building. And again, that's all completely voluntary. You're not required to log bats, but it's just, helpful since we're already out there in the field, to collect the data and help out our friends at MDC. So, what is next? In this coming week, what I'll be doing is I'll be sending out a Google form uh, that will just collect some general information from new or returning volunteers alike. If you're new, that form will collect your iNaturalist information so that we can get you added to the projects. It'll also collect your contact information so that we can add that to our internal contact list, so that other volunteers who you might be signed up with can reach out to you and you can work with each other to coordinate that meetup time and location. And I'll also be including a link to this presentation and a copy of the slides in case you want a refresher before you go out monitoring. And we'll also include all of those maps that you'll need for monitoring. Um, the sign up calendar then will also be going out where you can sign up for shifts. This fall, we're looking at following our historical time frame for surveys, which is generally starts around September 1st and goes for till mid to late October, depending on migratory activity. We use tools like Birdcast to kind of help inform us. If migration is kind of dragging a bit further out, we might add some additional survey dates. Um, but with that in mind, that brings me to the end of the formal presentation here. I will start to go over the questions and comments in the chat now. But if you have any questions or concerns that you don't want to ask this evening, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. Here's my email address. But yeah, we'll start going over the Q&A in the chat here, and then we'll go over anything else that anybody else might have before we release this evening.